Joining us now is Ben Burgis. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. Ben, did what I say about fact checkers... Oh, wait. We have the... okay, Ben's song first.
Gotta be streaming.
Debunk all of it. Logical analysis.
You're going to show us how to argue now. Go.
This is based on data for a bunch of different countries. There's abundant evidence that at this point that's bullshit. Breaking down these right-wing arguments and looking at how they're supposed to fit together.
Okay, break it down. Break it down. Break it down. Break it down. Hey, Ben, did what I say about fact checkers, could I get away with that as an ad hominem based on the truth?
Here's the thing, I think the difference between the obsession with fact-checking and trying to break down what's wrong with these ghouls' arguments is that one of them, the second one, is actually relevant, and the first one sometimes is, but oftentimes, like you said, it seems to be, for its own sake, and it's particularly annoying. Yeah, I've seen this. I saw that fact-check, too, that you did earlier, and I just didn't understand what the hell point that he thought that he was making there. And it's such a, even aside from the fact that the obsession with fact-checking is annoying and, everything else, it's just such a bizarre abuse of the concept of a fact-check. He was like, well, everything he said is true, but I didn't like it.
Well, and I think, that actually is the function of it, right? Because it's almost like, I'm not going to disprove this. In fact, I'll actually confirm that it's correct, but I'll put some cloud over it that doesn't make any sense, but maybe will work as a justification for other people to not take it seriously, if that makes sense. Somebody can say, oh, I read the Washington Post fact check. And that's a little questionable.
Yeah, it's like the voice of seriousness telling you what you have to take seriously and what you don't have to take seriously. That's all it's doing at that point. It's just totally the pretense that it has something to do with whether or not you got verifiable facts right is pretty much gone.
Right, exactly. So, we're going to go into a debunk actually on a bunch of questions that were sort of loaded at Bernie Sanders about Medicare-For-All at the debates, and maybe could be good, for anybody watching, obviously making the case for what we need to do with healthcare. More broadly, before we get there, though, I mean, do you have as a logician, not a rhetoric person, but do you have any kind of, although you are good at rhetoric, do you have any kind of broad takeaways, especially now that there are some polls? Do you have any kind of broad takeaways from the Democratic debates?
Yeah, Beto sucks a lot more than I thought he did. That was my big takeaway from
That's an ad hominem based in logic and reason, bro.
Yeah. And also, I don't like what she did as a prosecutor, but Kamala Harris must have been a hell of a prosecutor.
Right, definitely. No doubt.
And I mean, nothing she was saying about Biden was news, of course. I mean, we all know that, but, but she said it really well. And I mean, I'm not too, at least based on the early polls, I don't know how much of a difference it makes. It's made just yet, but the more people can be reminded of Biden's terrible, disgusting, racist, credit card company serving servile career, the better.
I think that also the other thing that's important to note is basically that as far as these debates go, I still don't think they matter that much yet. I think that
especially not when they're this crowded.
I don't think they matter that much yet. And I think they will. I mean, I think it's so hard to cover stuff right now because it's there's the off chance that something might matter. And then because our job is to particularly if you're, this show is better in this way because it's designed to be kind of more long lasting and it's not as news cycle dependent, but it's I don't know. I mean, the truth is that all of this could evaporate in a couple of weeks and then there'll be another debate. We have no clue. The only thing I would say about Kamala Harris, and to me, it was very reflective of whoever was in that crowd. There must have been a lot of very lame, like Democratic functionary types in that crowd, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Because she did great in the debate, which did not surprise me. She has a lot of political skills. But she had this line where she interrupted some dumb bickering that was going on. And she was like, we're not here to have a food fight.
God,
we're here to put food on people's tables. And the fact that got an applause line when I literally was like physically uncomfortable by how embarrassed I was to even watch that happen. Like, it was so lame and it was so scripted and it was so like, I mean, look, to her credit, I usually say this as an insult. I usually say like, oh, that definitely sounded better in the mirror, bro. In her case, it probably sounded good in the mirror too, but it was so fucking obvious that it was in the mirror. It was like, it was one of those moments where people were clapping where I felt totally comfortable being a snob. I was like, really? Like, this is real?
Yeah.
We're
good
doing
to remember
this?
that the crowd was full of these like Democratic, kind of functionary people because, because like Bernie did not get a lot of love in that crowd.
No.
And look, I don't want to be like too much of a cheerleader here. I think that there are aspects of his debated performance that could use improvement. But his closing statement was fucking excellent.
It was excellent.
And it is a testament to how worthless that crowd was. That it got so little love in the moment.
I agree completely. All right, so Bernie's going to have to deal with this in general, right? Like, everybody's copying him and trying to dilute his message, and everybody's out for him, particularly like the moderators, actually. Like, in a way, I feel like the other politicians on stage, precisely because he's recreated the political environment we're operating in, they actually give him more respect, maybe because they're in the profession and they kind of recognize what he's done. And then, just the totally mediocre talking heads moderating these things are always going to give him, they're just biased against him. It's just objective reality that we can see with our eyes. So they went after him, Medicare, a lot. We have a couple of different clips. I think I'm actually not sure how these are noted, Ben. So maybe we'll just play them.
Yeah, let's just. Why don't we just play them straight through?
Okay, we'll play them straight through, and then you'll.
Yeah.
Okay, and then just let us know what you think.
10 seconds just to answer the very direct question: will you raise taxes for the middle class in a Sanders administration?
People who have health care under Medicare-For-All will have no premiums, no deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. Yes, they will pay more in taxes, but less in health care for what they get.
Thank you.
Okay, that's one. Second exchange.
You basically want to scrap the private health insurance system as we know it and replace it with a government-run plan. None of the states that have tried something like that, California, Vermont, New York, has struggled with it, have been successful. If politicians can't make it work in those states, how would you implement it on a national level? How does this work?
Listen, I find it hard to believe that every other major country on earth, including my neighbor 50 miles north of me, Canada, somehow has figured out a way to provide health care to every man, woman, and child. And in most cases, they're spending 50% per capita what we are spending.
And finally, one more.
Senator Sanders says that Canada is single payer. There are 35 million people in Canada. There are 330 million people in the United States. Easily the number.
Okay. And then we end with that sort of like old AM talk radio chestnut about it's too many people. So Ben, lead us through the debunk.
Yeah, so on the first one, I thought it was worth throwing in because it is such a common argument that's made against Medicare-For-All. But honestly, I think Bernie, this was the one I think Bernie handled best in the moment. What he said is exactly the point that's worth making over and over and over again. Above everything else you could say about it, right? Beyond even the idea that some people having their taxes raised is such a great evil that we should let people die to avoid that, right? Which is what being opposed to single payer amounts to in practice, right? A lot more people die without it. But even beyond that, right? Like, like his point is exactly right. That if you're talking about, the average like middle income taxpayer, that what they're paying for their current tax burden plus their private health insurance premium is going to be much greater than what they'll be paying for just their tax burden, even with taxes raised a little bit to pay for Medicare-For-All, which is, in some ways that kind of feels like, okay, so it's like a pragmatic argument for these like middle-class taxpayers. That's not the argument we should be focusing on. But in some ways, I think that's actually a really important point, because that means, that really underscores that for the overwhelming majority of the population, this would be a benefit. Like pretty much, unless you're either extremely wealthy or you literally work for a health insurance company,
Right.
This would help you.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now on number
and you work
2,
at a healthcare company as an executive, as well. Like, let's be
right.
really clear about
That's
where
right,
in the
yeah.
tier. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's also a thing. So sometimes people will bring up, as an argument against Medicare-For-All, oh, you've got these like administrative workers and health insurance companies who'd be made redundant, which is kind of a funny argument, especially when it's being made by right-wingers, because they're essentially saying that like these layers of unnecessary bureaucracy you have with private health insurance should be kept as like a jobs program.
Right.
But also, every single Medicare-For-All bill that's been produced, certainly all the ones that Bernie has produced, include retraining programs for health insurance administrators who are made redundant.
Right.
So even beyond the fact that there's a very small number of jobs, like, if you look at this in comparison to the number of jobs people lose just in the month-to-month of the normal functioning of the capitalist economy, like even there, right? I mean, there's all the versions of this include some kind of pillar for those people. So yeah, the only people who are losing even there are really the people at the very top of those companies. So yeah, that's a point worth reiterating as much as possible. As far as the second thing about how these states that supposedly tried to do this, and if they failed, then how would you implement this? This seems like a textbook version of, just to be all nerdy about this for a second, the fallacy of equivocation that you're...
Oh, shit. Can I have my board, Matt? Wait. Hold on. Say that again. Go ahead.
It's the fallacy of equivocation.
The fallacy of equivocation, Perry Mason dropped. All right, go ahead.
Nice.
Yes.
But yeah, the same phrase is being used to mean two different things in two different parts of the argument, right? So in the conclusion, which is like the implied conclusion is that, how would you be able to implement this? In other words, you wouldn't be able to implement it. There was some kind of like logistical problem, or it's not practical to implement. That how would you implement means like, in terms of like actually making it a policy that would be effective. But in the premises, when you say, oh, all these states tried to do it and they couldn't implement it, what that means is that there were movements to create Medicare-For-All systems on a state level in the states that got to a certain point, but the bills never became law. It's not like, they, that like they ran into some sort of like, that they realized that they tried to do Medicare-For-All, but then like, they couldn't, they couldn't afford to compensate, the doctors in the hospitals. Or there was some
and
sort
also
of
I just want to say specifically in Vermont, one of the big one is it's actually sort of the inverse, which is kind of like, yes, it's a federal system. We need to do it everywhere or it will be undermined by the national problem of these companies, right? And also the other problem in Vermont, at least specifically, my understanding was and there's a totally different budgetary reality when it comes to the federal system versus the state system. And that the governor at the time, among other problems, did not do what Sanders did in the first part, which is say, yes, most people are obviously going to have a massive net positive, but there are going to be certain tax increases that go along with it. Again, another advantage is that you have at the federal level is you can also just say most of the tax-based change of this is going to be a massive reclaiming of wealth from people like Kessler's boss, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, and in all three cases, this is really worth emphasizing. You know, it's not that there was some sort of hurdle that was run into in the course of an attempt to implement it. It's that there was never an attempted implementation because, you know, centrist Democrats blocked it or got cold feet, right? Like in the New York case, you know, I think that was back when, you know, it was like the IDC, was blocking it. You know, and in the California case, it was the same kind of deal, right? Like I think it passed the state assembly, you know, but then like in the state Senate, there was and again, this wasn't even Republicans; these are just like shitty centrist Democrats, you know, put a block on it. So like it never became law in the first place. So like if the implication of the question is that this is impractical. But like all of those three examples really show is that there wasn't the political will to make it happen in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, then.
I wanted to actually just. Oh, there was one more thing you wanted to hit.
Yeah. Oh no, I was going to say when it comes to the third clip, the Bennett clip. Who's, if people don't recognize that guy, he's also running for president, but don't worry about it. You won't see him for very long.
Right, exactly.
In that last one, you know, he's saying, and by the way, actually, before we do this, though, there is one more point that should be made about the second one, which was, I think Bernie's answer was a pretty good answer, but he was also being put in a really tough situation here by the question, because the premise of the question was just wrong, right? It was these states tried to implement it and they ran into problems. That's not what happened. So Bernie is put in a position where he can either question the premise of the question and, you know, and say, no, that's not true, in which case he might look like he's dodging, you know, rhetorically that's a dubious strategy. So he made a reasonable decision to go the other way and just kind of barrel through it and talk about Canada. But it's frustrating because it's a loaded question. It's, you know, have you stopped beating your wife yet?
Right.
That, given this totally false claim about what happened in these three states, would you be able to do it or not? So I don't think there's a great solution to that in the moment. But his solution was reasonable, so, you know, which was just to say, okay, well, whatever, let's not even talk about
what
this.
I think he should do for that is find 3 comparable things that couldn't be achieved until they were federalized. Like, say, like, you know, I don't know what it is, but like, you know what? Like, states couldn't electrify themselves on their own. You needed a federal program. So your point is irrelevant. Maybe something like that. Really quick before you go, because I want to tack on this Discord question from attorney Andrew.
Just before that just super quick point. That last clip with Bennett, it's just total nonsense. There's no reason why the United States being relevant to Canada would make it any harder to implement. You have 10 times as many beneficiaries, but you also have 10 times as many people paying in. So this is the equivalent of people just grunting in a disapproving way about the idea of Medicare-For-All when people trot this out as if it were some sort of argument. It's just something they can like put on their sentiment of not liking it to like pretend that they have a substantive objection. Right. And, you know, it's not even worth taking seriously. The only correct response to it is, please explain to me why that would be a problem.
Perfect. Would it be helpful if Sanders and Surrogates started explaining why being able to choose Medicare among other private plans is not preferable to Medicare for all? First, it further incentivizes providers to not accept Medicare. Second, it lessens Medicare's bargaining power over prices. Third, it increases the price of insurance over Medicare for all because it has separate risk pools. Finally, every grade of public option still shows would leave 30 million uncovered, so it's not universal. I mean, those all sound like very good points to me. And I think they're the points that are really going to need to be sharpened as, you know, disingenuous people like Buttigieg start kind of talking in these Medicare for all who want it terms, which obviously is not Medicare. for all.
Yeah, no, it's clearly not, right? Like that's total nonsense. Yeah, and by the way, when there actually were some tentative ideas about how the public option would work in the early stages of Obamacare, it wasn't going to be available to everybody at any stage, right? There was always like means tested, and there's always so. But even if it wasn't means tested, I think those points are all totally correct. I think that's a really good summary of the case against it. The one thing I would just kind of add on to that, just as a little bow to tie on top of that, is that the sort of larger talking point that behind that is this idea that, it's really bad that Sanders wants to like take away insurance that people like. Why does everybody have to be on Medicare for all? Why not just the people who want it? What if people like their insurance? That you should be able to keep it. And this, I think, is just a willful misunderstanding of what it means for people to like their health insurance. What people mean when they say they like their health insurance is they don't have to pay very much for it, or they have to pay less than they think they'd have to under alternative plans, and they like the doctor who's in plan for them, right? They don't want to have to go see a different doctor, and both of those would be better under Medicare for All, because you would have you'd have to pay even less, right? I mean, that goes back to the first argument we were talking about. And every doctor would be in plan, right? You wouldn't have to worry about whether a doctor was in plan or not, or whether a hospital was in plan if you got hurt, out of state. The only way to go out of plan would be to leave the country.
Ben Burgis, give them an argument. Logic for the left. Thank you as always, brother. Talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you soon.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.